is an aspect of God that's we have to be thankful for, but it's almost hard to comprehend. Therefore, my beloved brethren, be ye steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord. For as much as ye know that your labor is not in vain with the Lord. Think about that. Christ died on the cross for my sins. He suffered the physical punishment. He suffered the emotional punishment for me. In return for that, he asked that I serve him by serving others. Perfectly reasonable, rational, logical. But on top of that, he says, if you do that, your work will not go in vain. I will reward you for it. So what should be logical, and is pales in comparison to what he did for us, he says, do this, and then I'm going to reward you for it. So it's not in vain. Your service and my service is not in vain. Now, we don't do it for that reason, but it's a benefit. And like the song said, you and I might not see the result right now. You might have worked in a ministry of the church for 15 years, and nobody might have said anything. Right? But God says your work is not in vain. I think about the food bank ministry, for example. There are people that work in the food bank that most of you don't know that they work in the food bank. If I were to have people stand up tonight that work in the food bank, they would be embarrassed, and tomorrow morning they would be upset at me because they don't do it for you to recognize them. But their effort is not in vain. When I think back to the idea that a lot of times we say, I can't serve because my ability or whatever. And I mentioned food bank, and I know a lot of you work on Mondays, but there's many other ministries. But if you were to look at the people that work in food bank, there are retired people, there's kids, there's single men, there's widows. There's a wide range of people. Some like to speak in front of the other people. They come in and give the gospel. Other people, if you ask them to do that, they would be very uncomfortable. Some just like to serve. Some just like to greet. If you were to look at just that ministry and every ministry in the church, you would see a wide variety of people with a wide variety of gifts. And they all do their part, and God brings it together as a whole. Right? And so God challenges us to serve. He commands it. He examples it. And it's logical. It's rational. Many of you have heard of D.L. Moody. In the late 1800s, D.L. Moody was having a pastors' conference in Massachusetts, and many pastors from Europe came over. And the custom there in Europe at the time was at the end of an evening, if you were staying in somebody's house or a hotel, you would put your shoes out in the hall, and somebody would come by and they would shine your shoes that night, clean them up, and leave them there for the next morning. Well, obviously, we didn't follow that custom here in America like they did in Europe. And so D.L. Moody was walking down the hall of the hotel where many of the preachers were staying, and he saw all these shoes out in the hallway. And he was walking with several young ministerial students, and he pointed out to them that the preachers had left their shoes in their hall expecting them to be cleaned. And the young guys kind of looked at that with a pious look, or that silence, or I don't want to do that. That's below me. And so he escorted them to where they were going, and he went back, and he collected all the shoes off that hallway, took them back to his room, and spent that time that evening cleaning, shining all the shoes of all the pastors. Nobody would have known except for one of his friends happened to come to his room to talk to him about something. So the next morning, all the pastors from Europe come out in the hall, and their shoes are perfectly shined. They think it's just like Europe. America does the same thing. Nobody ever told them that. For the next several nights of the meeting, other pastors that heard what D.L. Moody had done took turns secretly, and they would go after all the pastors from Europe were in their room, and they would collect the shoes, and they would clean them, and they would shine them and put them back the next morning because of his example. The guy I was reading said, that's probably a little insight into one of the reasons why God used D.L. Moody in such a great way was his servant's heart and his willingness to be used of God. In closing, once we're saved, it should be a joy, it should be an honor, it should be a delight for me and for you to serve God. It's rational. It's logical. We almost should feel guilty that it's not even close to being able to repay him for what he's done. But God's chosen to give us that command. He's chosen to example it, and he's asked us to serve him. Now, I did not speak with Pastor Nolan about what he was speaking about this morning. He talked about in John 9, verse 4, where it says, Jesus said, work for the night is coming, and that whole idea. So the challenge tonight is this. There's a balance in being still and being a servant. If we spend our whole life serving, we're going to do good things and we're going to neglect the most important thing, which is our relationship with Jesus Christ. If I spend my whole time sitting and soaking in like a sponge, but I never give out, you can only take in so much. Right? I was reading about the Dead Sea today. The Dead Sea is dead because it takes things in and it has no way to give it out. And many Christians are that way today. They're dead spiritually, and it's because we sit and we take in, and we can only take in so much, so then we just sit, and we never give anything out. And so my challenge to myself and to each of us tonight is this, to be honest. Am I using my time? Am I using my talent? Do I have my priorities in the right biblical order? And there's no excuses. All those excuses I try to give, there's a biblical answer for why they're not excuses. And I don't want to stand before God one day and try to give an excuse of why I didn't serve him, because it's going to be weak and it's going to not even be valid. But on the other hand, if you spend your life serving God, I promise you will not get to heaven and say, I wish I had not spent my life serving God. Because God's promised us that our efforts are not in vain. Remember, it's not so much my ability, it's my availability. If you're available, if I'm available, then God has promised that he will use us.